Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2013 Advanced. In this section we're going to start to look at the Access event model. And basically an event is the consequence of an action, the result of a user action, and it can be things like clicking a button or pressing a key on the keyboard. The way that we build up Access applications is by reacting to events in specific ways, and in particular making sure that when an event occurs we take the right action in our Access application. And that's exactly what we're going to start to look at in this section. Now, as you'll know, if you've been using Access for a while, you don't actually need to write code to make an Access application. You can, even for relatively complex databases, produce working database applications without writing code. But you'll also know that to some extent you're restricted in some things. There may be certain things you'd like to be able to do. Maybe you'd like the validation of a form to work in a slightly different way, or maybe you'd want to be able to check something else before you decide whether you can delete a record. There may be all sorts of extra little features, ways you'd like to change the way that things work, and that's really what you achieve by writing code. Now, if you don't write code, you still have events happening. If I click on that button there that says Students, a sequence of events occur. When the form opens, that gives me information about students. Again, a sequence of events occurs. And whilst I'm using that form to look at student data or maybe make changes to student data and so on, again, more and more events occur. Even if I move the mouse around on the screen here, a huge number of events are being generated by Access, corresponding to each movement of the mouse. What we're looking at from this section onwards is how to react to events. Not so much how to react to them in the standard way, although we will look at that to begin with, but more how you can customize the way that events are reacted to within your Access application. Now, in order to demonstrate a little bit about event handling and event-driven applications, I'm going to take an extremely straightforward example. This student database, I'm going to close it and reopen it. And I want you to watch carefully what happens as it reopens. You watch that little panel there, College Student Database, with the picture of the two students. I'm not touching anything, it's gone. That is what's sometimes called a splash screen. And a splash screen is something that appears for a period of time when you open an application, and after that period of time the splash screen just disappears. It's often used just as a sort of hello or a welcome, or maybe to give the user something to look at while things are prepared within the application itself. Let's look at how that splash screen works. So if I go into the design of the splash screen, there it is. It's got a graphic in the middle, it's got some text at the top, a label, College Student Database. At the bottom it's got a version number corresponding to the version number of this database. And if I go into the property sheet, let's start looking at format properties. You'll see its default view is a single form. Allow form view, yes. Allow datasheet view, no. Allow layout view, no. So we only have form view for it. And then interestingly, further down, there are no record selectors, no navigation buttons, no control box, no close button, no min or max buttons. So this form is basically just a form. So how does it get closed? Well, let's look at the Event tab. If you scroll down the events, you'll find that one of the events has an event procedure associated with it, and the event is a timer expiring. Now, when you set a timer event for a form, you actually set it in two parts. First of all, you set the timer interval in milliseconds, so that's this figure here, which is 8,000 milliseconds, which is 8 seconds, and then the on timer is the event procedure that is called when the timer expires. So basically, timer interval 8,000, 8 seconds, event procedure, let's look at the event procedure. Option compare database, of course, it's a very simple private sub form timer n sub, and it's do command dot close. Now I'm going to come back to do command in a moment, but basically what this command says is close this current form. Now in the Visual Basic Editor you should notice over here that the module that's selected is one of the class modules, and it's the class module for the form FRM splash screen. And in fact all of the event procedures associated with that form FRM splash screen, will be in this class module. And in fact you can see all of those event procedures right here, because there is only that one private sub form underscore timer. Now that's a standard name. The event procedures associated with a form will have names private, they're subs with an n sub of course, form tells you that it's a form procedure, underscore, and then the event will be in this case a timer event, which basically means a timer expiring. Now if you needed to add another event procedure to this form, it's pretty straightforward. If you click on the right hand drop down above the code window there's a list of all of the event procedures that you might choose to create for this form. So if I say wanted an open event procedure, something that would happen on open, if I click on open it gives me an empty form open procedure, and I can type some commands in there. I can say what I want to happen when the form opens. Now if at any stage I create one of those and it's got nothing in it, which is the case with that form open procedure there, leaving it there doesn't do any harm. That's how I create one, or it's an easy way of creating one. If I leave an empty one there, it's not really going to do any harm. But I generally tend to only leave in the module the procedures that have actually got some content in them. And as I say, note that the naming standard for those is pretty strict and you should adhere to it. The other control above the code window there, the one on the left, lets me select objects associated with that form. Now one of the objects on the form was that picture in the middle of the two students, then there was a label at the top. That's a list of all the various objects on that form, and each of those may have certain event procedures associated with them. So for instance, if I take the image one there, image 20, let's see what procedures we've got associated with that. Well, at the moment there is a click procedure, or I should say an on-click procedure, to react to the click event. So if I click on that form at the moment, nothing will happen. For an image, there's quite a limited number of things that you can react to. You can react to a click, a double click, a mouse down, a mouse move, or a mouse up. Supposing I add a double click event procedure, and in that event procedure I just put this. I'm going to get rid of the click procedure that I don't need. Now what I'm going to do is to close that, close the form, make sure I say yes to saving changes. Let me just open the form up again. I don't actually need to restart the database to kick it off, but let's just open it up again. And I'll quickly double click on the picture. And there's my message, double click. Click on OK, and the picture's timer just kicked in as well. So that's how you associate event procedures with either forms or objects on forms, and how you make things happen when users do things. Now there are a few more things to explain about that splash screen. First of all, you may now have a clear picture of why it closes after 8 seconds, but you may be wondering why it opened in the first place. And that's a pretty straightforward one to answer, because if we go into Options, on the Current Database tab, there is an initial display form, and you can choose a form to display when the database starts up. And a splash screen would be the one you choose to put in there as the form that opens when the database starts up. And as I mentioned before, the database options such as that one are executed before the AutoExec, but in the AutoExec we actually open the FRM switchboard form, the main switchboard form that's used in this application, in order to give users access to the various functions to maintain this student database. So that's where in the AutoExec macro we open the form FRM switchboard, and there is the main switchboard form for this student database application. As the course progresses from now on, we're going to work on a switchboard for the movies database, so we'll finish up with pretty much the equivalent for the movies database later on. Now let me once again return to the splash screen and talk about one or two other things there that are important. One of them is that the splash screen is declared to be a pop-up, and it's not modal, which means that in theory you could do other things while it's displayed. Given that it's only displayed for 8 seconds, you probably couldn't do an awful lot. And the other thing I want to do, I want to go back into that event procedure for the timer event, and I mentioned do command, do CMD. That's a very important VBA command, a VBA statement, because it's basically the one you use to tell VBA to do tasks such as opening forms and closing forms and so on for you. Now the command that do command is executing for us at the moment is the close command. It's do command.close, and the close command closes a form, which is pretty straightforward. If you don't specify a name for the form, normally you'd have a form name after the do command close, then it will be the current form. And in the case of form underscore timer, obviously whichever form that on timer event procedure is assigned to is the form that's going to be closed when we do command not close. And in fact, if I chose an object, a control, an image, or something else on that form to cause the form to be closed, that would work fine as well without the form being named. So for instance, if I take a copy of that and paste it over message box double click, what I'm basically saying is if I double click on that image, that will close the current form as well. So let's just give that a try. Once again, I'll have to open this splash screen and then do the double click pretty quickly, and it's closed. Now I'm going to set you an exercise to do in just a moment, but I've got one other thing to show you first. If I go into the design here of the switchboard for this database, if I want to apply an event procedure to an object or to the form itself, and there isn't one there already, if you click in one of these empty property boxes on the right, you get the familiar little 3 dots. That symbol is actually called an ellipsis, and when you click on it you get this dialog, choose builder, and it gives you 3 options. One option is macro builder, so bear in mind, as we're going to see later on in the course, that you can also attach a macro to one of these events. You don't have to write VBA, and we'll have 1 or 2 macro examples later on. You can also go into the expression builder that you've seen many times before, and you can actually build an expression to represent what needs to be done. But to go into the VBA code editor, you choose code builder here and click on OK, and that's what takes you into the VBA editor. Okay, you should be a sufficiently proficient VBA programmer now to do the next exercise. What I want you to do is to take example 7, which is the last version of the movies database that we produced, and what I want you to do is to disable the mechanism for showing the welcome screen. You can just uncheck the box in the record in the settings table just to make sure that the welcome screen doesn't show at the moment, and using the graphic and possibly the whole screen if you want, turn it into a splash screen that shows for 6 seconds when you start up the movies database. You can put in some sort of dummy version number, you can put in your own name as the author, put a copyright notice, whatever you like on that splash screen. But it needs to appear for 6 seconds. You need to bear in mind all the points about not having close buttons on it and so on. And it needs to be pop-up. You don't want it modal, all the other things that we've talked about. So that's the next exercise. My answer to that is example 8. I'll see you in the next section.